I'm Catherine Tomlinson and I started an eco-conscious pottery company called Oxford Clay. So I don't just make pottery, I make resources for other potters wanting to be more eco-friendly in their pottery practice. And that's what this podcast is all about. It's about sharing everything I've learned along my eco-conscious pottery journey with you. And I'm so glad you're here with me. Let's go. Hello and welcome back to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm Catherine Tomlinson, and in today's episode we're going to be talking about kiln schedules. So we're going to be talking about what is a kiln schedule and some kind of crucial terms that are used in when describing a kiln schedule. So you can kind of maybe if you see one in a book, you'll be able to like read it and you'll be like, right, I understand what's happening in that kiln schedule. So basically, a kiln schedule is a way of describing what the kiln is doing to the pot when it's like inside the kiln during a firing. So the kiln schedule describes the very beginning to the very end and all the different processes in between. So like, the heating, the different times it's heated, might be held at a certain temperature, and then it's cooled for so long. So that entire process, that is the kiln schedule. So every kiln will have a kind of, its own, say like type of kiln, will have its own kind of kiln schedule. But say like for a gas kiln, that might look different to if a potter was using like an electric kiln, because they kind of like work in different ways. They might heat in different ways. They might heat at different rates. Or so what I'm going to be talking about today is an electric kiln schedule. So that's the kiln that I use. I have an electric kiln, and electric kilns are fantastic to use for pottery, for potters to use. They're cheap to run, they're very easy to use. You can just kind of set them and go away. So you don't have to be managing them. You don't have to be like adding wood, to the kiln throughout the night, to keep it going, to keep it at a certain temperature. You don't have to be kind of, burning any fuel, getting all that fuel. You can run them off renewable energy. They're so good. They've made pottery just, incredibly convenient for potters, because before that, potters, were having to pretty much like wood fire all their work, build these massive kilns and fire it with wood, fuel. And then came different kilns, sort of like gas and oil kilns, where other fuels were burned. But electric kilns have been like such a fantastic resource for potters, because they just make firing so much easier. So the way an electric kiln is kind of told what to do is by a kind of a small kind of thing called a programmer, which is plugged into the kiln. So you can buy a kiln without a programmer, but you do need really a programmer to tell the kiln what to do, because otherwise that kiln won't be able to know how much to heat for, for how long. It doesn't know what you want it to do. Whereas the kiln programmer, so it just sits on the side of the kiln in a little holder, and you just plug it in. And my kiln actually, it said, do you want to buy the kiln and do you want to buy the programmer as well? And I was like, yes. So I bought them both together, and then I just plugged it in when it arrived. I plugged the programmer in, and it just sits right next to the electric kiln. And the programmer is like, it's kind of like a little computer. You can program different kiln schedules into it. So for example, the kiln schedule, so the amount of heating, holding, cooling, that will look different to, in a bisque firing than it would in a glaze firing, so like a stoneware glaze firing. And you can also program in an earthenware glaze firing if you wanted to do, a bit cooler. Okay, so let's get on to the description of an actual kiln schedule and the terms involved, just in case if you see these terms, you'll be like, oh, now I understand what that actually means. Because I didn't when I first started, and I was like, I don't understand what this means. So I just had to do loads of reading, and hopefully this will save that for you. Okay, so there are four terms really that are used in a kiln sort of program, a kiln schedule. So the first one is called the segment. And this refers to, like, if you think about like an amount of time, and it can be divided up, say, like into segments. So there might be like segment one, and might be like, segment two. And that's exactly what it means in the kiln firing. It just means like one segment, you're telling the kiln to do a certain thing, like heat a certain speed, and then another segment, you're asking it to do something else. It could be like, the bit where it gets like even hotter, even faster, sort of thing. So kiln schedules are often divided into segments. So in my electric kiln, I've got two segments, and I can program each of the segments to do something different during the firing. I've just realised I actually have three segments, because I have the first segment, the second segment, and then I have like a cooling segment at the end. So that's kind of like not really programmable, it's just cooling down naturally, sort of thing. Okay, so different segments, you can program different things to happen in each segment. And then another term that's used is the set point, and the set point is actually the highest temperature that the kiln will reach in that firing or in that segment. So for example, if you think about like a stoneware firing, a stoneware glaze firing, you might want that the set point to be 1280 degrees Celsius. And so everything you're asking the kiln to do is kind of like building up to that set point, and then you might say to the kiln, okay, then switch off, and then it will cool down naturally from that set point. So the set point, basically, if you think about it, is like the highest temperature that you want the kiln to go to. So different segments, you could program different segments perhaps to have like a different set point. So you're going to heat to a certain set point, and then you're going to heat to another set point. So so set point in a section could be the highest temperature you want the kiln to program to that in that section. So the next term that's used is the ramp speed. Okay, ramp. So ramp just means how fast you want to heat the kiln. And so ramp is usually measured in degrees Celsius or degrees Fahrenheit. So for example, at the beginning of a firing, you might want it to heat up more slowly than in when the firing kind of like gets going, because at the very beginning of the firing, the pots might still have a bit of moisture in, and so if you heat it too quickly in that first section, you can end up exploding pots, because the steam is getting released, in the kiln like very quickly, and that can explode pots. So I was reading about this the other day, and it was saying that you don't want to have a ramp speed at the beginning of a kiln firing of more than 100 degrees per hour, because if you have it more than 100 degrees per hour, that's when you can have pots exploding. That's just like too fast, too hot, too fast, basically. So the ramp speed indicates the level of heating per time. So it's usually measured in hours. So it'll be degrees Celsius or degrees Fahrenheit per hour. That's how the ramp speed is measured. So for example, it might be like 80 degrees. It might be like 100 degrees. Later on in the firing, it might be like 120 degrees per hour. And that just tells the kiln, right, I know I need to increase the temperature in 120 degrees in this next hour, by firing the elements, making the kiln hotter by that amount in the next hour. So that's the ramp speed. So ramp speed is really crucial. Ramp speed is really what you're kind of programming into the kiln programmer to tell it, how hot to make the kiln, how fast. Okay, and then the final term is called a soak, and a soak refers to, basically, if I always think about like a bath, like soaking, and basically what you're doing is you're soaking those pots for a certain amount of time in that temperature. So what you've told the kiln to do is keep the temperature the same for a certain amount of time. So quite often you'll have a soak at the very top, at the very set point of the kiln firing. And that's because you really want that. So for example, in a stoneware firing, you really want the glaze to be, actually maturing in that time. So for example, I actually have a soak. So I have a ramp, and then I have a soak at the very top of the temperatures, and so it's 1280 degrees, and I keep the Celsius 1280 degrees Celsius, and I keep the pots at that temperature for 15 minutes, and that just melts. That makes sure all the glaze is really properly melting on the pot, and then I ask the kiln to switch off, and then it cools down naturally. So that's the soak. I've actually tried to soak them for a bit longer because sometimes if you have glaze which isn't really sort of melted properly, it might need a higher temperature. It might need just a little tiny bit longer soaking. And what I found was some of my pots were slightly underfired a couple of times. So I tried to increase the soak time. So I increased it to you really don't need long at all. So I increased it to 17 minutes. And what I found was that actually started to burn out some of the colour, because I use verdigris, which is quite a gentle colourant, and I found that it just kind of burned away a lot of the colour. So I think 15 minutes for me is my optimum soak time at that extremely high temperature, and that allows the glaze to melt really nicely. Okay, so let's go through an actual kiln schedule so you can actually see what one looks like. So basically this kiln schedule is from the book Eco-Conscious Pottery Glazing. Make your own pottery glazes with minimal harm to humans, animals and the environment. And that book is available on the Oxford Clay website and Amazon as well. And so the whole point of this book basically is to kind of give you some glaze recipes, some really kind of easy, simple glaze recipes. So there's 17 in there. But obviously, as a reader of the book, you're going to need to know how to fire the glazes. So let's talk about a stoneware firing. Okay, so I'm going to go through the actual schedule and just tell you how it works. Okay. So the first segment, segment number 1 has a ramp speed of 80 degrees Celsius per hour up to a set point of 200 degrees. Okay, so the kiln knows that it needs to be heating 80 degrees every hour up to 200 degrees, and that's the first segment. Okay, so once it's done that, once it's reached 200 degrees, so you can see that's quite slow in the beginning, the heating, and that's just to make sure that nothing explodes, hopefully. Okay, so that's the first segment, and then this is the second segment of this firing. Okay, so then I've asked it to heat the kiln 120 degrees Celsius per hour up to 1260. Okay, so that is the set point of this firing, of this segment and this entire firing. So you can see that that's getting fired hotter, quicker. And the kiln knows that every hour it needs to heat inside to 120 degrees Celsius up to 1260. I think I said 1280 earlier in the episode. Sorry about that. I always get those two mixed up. No, I do get them mixed up when I actually fire. I just get them mixed up in my mind. So that's the set point of a stoneware firing is 1000. Well, the one I've programmed into my kiln is 1260. So obviously, different clays might be fired hotter, and you might be firing your clay to 1280. that's or a porcelain. Sometimes they get fired up to 1300 degrees. Okay, and then I've asked the kiln, the next part of the kiln schedule is that I've then asked it to soak for 15 minutes at 1260 degrees Celsius. So So that is the full schedule, but then I've asked the kiln to switch off and then it cools down naturally. So the full schedule is basically from the very start to the very finish, when you can like actually open the kiln to get to see your work. But the last part of the kiln schedule, the cooling part, I haven't programmed that in. I just cool the kiln naturally. Now, actually, some potters control the cooling of their work as well, of their firings as well, and that can stop kind of glaze faults. Like, you can get pinholing if you cool something too fast. You might get some other glaze faults if you cool a kiln too fast. So some potters actually do control the cooling of their kilns, but I don't. I basically just ask the kiln to switch off, and then because it's so well insulated, it takes about 2 days to cool down anyway. So I don't feel like I need to control the cooling at all. It will stay really hot for ages, and cool down, and I don't get any glaze faults from that point of view. So okay, so let's just go through a very quick example of a bisque firing, just so you kind of understand the differences of a bisque firing and a glaze firing. So the bisque firing, this would be done, the first firing a pot would undergo before it's glazed. So this would be, this, for example, is 80 degrees Celsius per hour up to 200 degrees Celsius. So very similar. And then the next segment is then 120 degrees Celsius per hour up to 950 degrees Celsius. With a 10-minute soak at 950 degrees Celsius. So you can see that's actually really similar. It's got the first segment exactly the same heating wise and the stoneware glaze firing, and then it's got the second segment is heated exactly the same rate. It's just that it gets to a cooler temperature than the stoneware glaze firing, and it only has a 10-minute soak. So the set point of that first segment would be 200 degrees, then the set point of the next segment would be 950 degrees Celsius. The soak time 10 minutes, and the ramp speed, it's got 2 different ramp speeds in those 2 different segments. Okay, so I hope that's been interesting, informative for you. Just a huge thank you for joining me on this episode. It's kiln schedules, they might seem incredibly complex, but you're really only programming a couple of bits of information into that programmer, if you're using an electric kiln. Just to say as well, programmers can store loads of different programs. So, you can program, say, loads of them, like bisque, hot, very high fire bisque one, a low fire bisque one. You could have, earthenware glaze, stoneware glaze, loads of different, schedules you could have in there. But if you wanted a couple of just key ones, if you want a bisque and a stoneware firing, you could just take them from what I've said, or you can have a look inside the book Eco-Conscious Pottery Glazing. Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you on the next episode. Until then, happy potting. Bye. So if you enjoyed that and you're interested to learn more about eco-conscious pottery, head over to the Oxford Clay website, which is www.oxfordclay.co.uk. I can't wait to see you there.